The mahogany doors of the penthouse boardroom were locked, sealing the fate of a $14 billion empire. Rocky Whitmore, a titan of Silicon Valley, was sweating through his bespoke Tom Ford suit. His lead translator was missing, his treacherous vice president was smirking, and 5 of the world's most ruthless international investors were seconds away from walking out, taking his legacy with them. The room descended into a chaotic shouting match of French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. The company was dead, until the waitress, a woman who had just been pouring their sparkling water, quietly set down her silver tray, cleared her throat, and calmly commanded the room in flawless, unaccented Parisian French. The storm outside the 65th floor of the Aon Center in Chicago mirrored the brewing catastrophe inside. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Dynamics' global headquarters, blurring the skyline into a miserable grey canvas. Rocky Whitmore stood at the head of the 20-foot mahogany conference table, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather back of his chair. At 42, Rocky had built a logistics and robotics empire from a single garage prototype to a global behemoth. But today, he was watching it slip through his fingers. The acquisition deal on the table was the most complex in the history of the sector. To secure the international supply chains necessary to keep Whitmore Dynamics alive, Rocky needed the unanimous signature of the European Quintet, a formidable alliance of 5 logistics barons who controlled the ports, rails, and skies of Europe and South America. They were proud, old-money traditionalists who refused to conduct business of this magnitude in anything other than their native tongues. Rocky checked his Rolex. 11:45 a.m. The meeting was scheduled to begin 15 minutes ago. "Where is she?" Rocky muttered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Gregory Langdon, Whitmore's chief operating officer, checked his phone with an air of practiced nonchalance. "I don't know, Rocky. I sent the company car for Beatrice over an hour ago. Her phone is going straight to voicemail." "You personally oversaw the logistics for this morning, Gregory," Rocky said, his sharp blue eyes locking onto his COO. "Beatrice is the only polyglot in the state who holds the clearance and the vocabulary for this specific merger. She doesn't just miss a $14 billion closing." Gregory sighed, adjusting his silk tie. "Traffic is terrible. The storm is unprecedented. Perhaps she had an accident. In the meantime, our guests are growing restless." At the opposite end of the room, the 5 investors were already seated, their body language broadcasting deep irritation. Antoine Laurent, the French shipping magnate, was tapping his Mont Blanc pen rhythmically against his notepad. Klaus Becker, the German robotics industrialist, had his arms crossed over his chest, his face like carved granite. Lorenzo Rossi, the Italian transport king, was aggressively whispering to Isabella Cruz, the Spanish tech metals heiress, who looked ready to catch the next private jet back to Madrid. Beside them, Tiago Mendes, the Brazilian distribution czar, was aggressively scrolling through his phone, shaking his head. None of them spoke more than broken, conversational English, and none of them trusted each other. Beatrice was supposed to be the bridge. Without her, the room was a powder keg of cultural misunderstandings and billion-dollar egos. While the titans of industry stewed, Shila Cooper moved silently along the perimeter of the room. Clad in the crisp black vest and white button-down of the elite Crescent catering service, Shila was practically invisible to the billionaires. She preferred it that way. 6 months ago, she had been a delivery woman for a high-end courier service, sprinting through the sleet to drop off legal documents. The catering gig paid better tips, but the exhaustion was the same. She meticulously arranged the charcuterie, aligning the artisan cheeses and imported grapes with geometric precision. Shila's presence in the room was a fluke. The senior catering manager had called in sick, and Shila, desperate for the double-time pay to cover her mother's crushing medical debt, had volunteered to run the VIP suite. She poured a fresh cup of espresso from the silver carafe, her movements fluid and practiced. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind was buzzing. She could hear the tension in the room. She could hear the whispers. Ce stupide Américain est en train de nous faire perdre notre temps, Antoine Laurent grumbled to himself. This stupid American is wasting our time. Shila's hand briefly paused over the espresso cup. She didn't look up, but her ears dialed into the conversation. Hat keinen Respekt vor unseren Terminen, Klaus Becker muttered to his assistant in German. He has no respect for our schedules. Shila placed the porcelain cup on a saucer, her heart beating a little faster. She moved down the line, refreshing Isabella Cruz's sparkling water. Isabella let out a sharp sigh. Si no empezamos en 5 minutos, retiro mi capital. If we don't start in 5 minutes, I am withdrawing my capital. Shila understood every single word. She kept her eyes cast down, playing the part of the background scenery perfectly. Before her life had derailed, before her father's sudden death and the mountain of debt that followed, Shila had been a top-tier linguistic anthropology and international business double major at Georgetown University. She possessed a rare, eidetic memory for syntax and sound. She didn't just speak languages, she absorbed them, understanding the cultural idioms, the micro-expressions, the weight behind the syllables. But life didn't care about degrees when the bank was foreclosing on your home. It only cared about hourly wages. Suddenly, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. A junior executive rushed in, pale and out of breath. He whispered furiously into Gregory Langdon's ear. Gregory's eyes widened in mock horror. "Rocky!" Gregory announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. "It's Beatrice. She was in a hit-and-run on the Eisenhower Expressway. She's alive, but she's being taken to Northwestern Memorial. She won't be coming." The color drained from Rocky's face. The room plunged into a suffocating silence. Gregory leaned in, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Rocky, we have to reschedule, or we use the AI translation software. I have it loaded on the monitors. You know they strictly forbade AI translation in the contract," Rocky hissed, his panic finally bubbling to the surface. "They consider it a security risk. They want a human interpreter, bound by an NDA, translating in real time." "Then the deal is dead," Gregory said softly, though a glimmer of triumph danced in his eyes. Rocky didn't know it, but Shila had seen that exact look before. It was the look of a man who had orchestrated the entire disaster. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted from irritated to openly hostile. Sensing the panic from the American executives, the foreign investors began to stir. Antoine Laurent stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He looked directly at Rocky and unleashed a torrent of rapid-fire French. "C'est une insulte. Nous avons traversé l'océan pour signer ces documents, et vous n'avez même pas la courtoisie d'avoir un interprète. Ce partenariat est une farce." Rocky stood frozen, holding his hands up placatingly. "Mr. Laurent, please, if you could just give us an hour to find a replacement." Klaus Becker slammed his hand on the table, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. "Ein Austausch in einer Stunde. Das ist unprofessionell und inakzeptabel. Wir sind hier fertig." He signaled to his legal team to pack up their briefcases. Lorenzo Rossi threw his hands in the air, yelling in Italian about American incompetence, while Tiago Mendes shook his head, muttering under his breath in Portuguese that this was exactly why his board had warned him against dealing with Whitmore. The cacophony of 5 different languages colliding in anger was deafening. Rocky felt the walls closing in. $14 billion, thousands of jobs. His entire life's work was dissolving into the carpet because of a traffic accident. Gregory Langdon stood beside him, trying hard to suppress a smile. I'll call security to escort them to their cars, Rocky. It's over. We'll have to consider the buyout offer from Apex Solutions. Apex Solutions, the rival company, the one Gregory had secret ties to. The pieces clicked into place in Rocky's mind, but he was powerless to stop the avalanche. Shila was standing near the back wall, holding a pitcher of ice water. She watched the chaos unfold. She watched Rocky Whitmore, a man known for his ruthless brilliance, looking utterly defeated. And she watched Gregory Langdon, recognizing the sly, predatory posture of a corporate snake. She knew she shouldn't interfere. Her manager's voice echoed in her head. You are the furniture. Serve the food, pour the drinks, and keep your mouth shut. If she spoke up, she would be fired from Crescent Catering on the spot. She needed this job. She needed the tips. But then, she heard Antoine Laurent say something to Klaus Becker. Si Whitmore ne peut pas gérer une simple réunion, imaginez comment il gérera nos algorithmes d'expédition. Langdon m'a dit, hier soir, que Whitmore était sur le point de faire faillite. If Whitmore can't handle a simple meeting, imagine how he will handle our shipping algorithms. Langdon told me last night that Whitmore was on the verge of bankruptcy. Shila froze. Langdon told him last night? Gregory had been feeding the investors false information behind Rocky's back. This wasn't just a missing translator. This was a meticulously planned corporate assassination. Isabella Cruz stood up, picking up her Birkin bag. Senor Whitmore, she said, in slow, heavily accented English, her voice dripping with disdain. This is, how you say, a disaster. I go. She turned toward the door. The others followed her lead. The exodus had begun. The glass pitcher in Shila's hands felt heavy. Before her brain could catch up with her instincts, she stepped forward. She didn't walk gracefully. She moved with the sheer, blunt force of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Madame Cruz, Shila's voice rang out. It wasn't loud, but the absolute clarity and perfect Castilian pronunciation cut through the shouting like a blade. Por favor, le ruego que tome asiento. El señor Whitmore ha sido víctima de un sabotaje interno, no de incompetencia. Please, I beg you to take a seat. Mr. Whitmore has been the victim of internal sabotage, not incompetence. Isabella stopped dead in her tracks. She turned around slowly, her dark eyes landing on the woman in the catering uniform, holding a water pitcher. The room went deathly quiet. Every eye locked onto the waitress. Rocky blinked, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Gregory's jaw dropped. Antoine Laurent frowned, looking at Shila with a mixture of confusion and offense. De quoi parlez-vous, mademoiselle? Qui êtes-vous pour nous adresser la parole? What are you talking about, miss? Who are you to address us? Shila calmly set the pitcher down on the mahogany table. She smoothed her black vest, stood up impeccably straight, and looked the French billionaire dead in the eye. Je suis la personne qui vient d'entendre que Monsieur Langdon vous a menti hier soir concernant la solvabilité de cette entreprise, Monsieur Laurent, Shila replied in flawless, aristocratic French. I am the person who just heard that Mr. Langdon lied to you last night regarding the solvency of this company, Mr. Laurent. Antoine's eyes widened in shock. Before anyone could recover, Shila turned her gaze to the imposing German industrialist, Klaus Becker. Herr Becker, Sie haben Recht, Professionalität zu fordern, she said, her German sharp, precise and authoritative. Aber wahre Professionalität bedeutet auch, Verrat zu erkennen. Herr Whitmore wusste nichts von diesen Verzögerungen. Mr. Becker, you are right to demand professionalism, but true professionalism also means recognizing betrayal. Mr. Whitmore knew nothing of these delays. Klaus lowered his arms, genuinely taken aback. Lorenzo Rossi and Tiago Mendes stared at her, utterly speechless. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Gregory Langdon finally exploded, his face turning a dark shade of red. "Security! Get this caterer out of here immediately!" "No," Rocky's voice boomed. It wasn't a request. It was an absolute command. He stepped around the table, approaching Shila as if she were a mirage that might vanish. He looked at her catering name tag, Shila. "You speak French, Spanish, and German?" Rocky asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief. "And Italian and Portuguese, Mr. Whitmore," Shila said, her eyes meeting his. She didn't shrink under his intense gaze. "I also know how to read a room. Your COO has been orchestrating a panic. He's actively trying to kill this deal." "This is absurd," Gregory shouted, stepping toward Rocky. "She's a waitress, a nobody. You're going to listen to a girl pouring coffee over your own partner?" "Shut up, Gregory," Rocky snapped, without looking away from Shila. He looked at the 5 investors, who were now standing near the table, deeply intrigued by the sudden dramatic turn of events. "Can you translate the technical terms of this merger?" Rocky asked her quietly. "Supply chain logistics, equity divisions, intellectual property clauses." "I wrote my undergraduate thesis on international maritime law and supply chain integration," Shila replied evenly. "So yes." Rocky turned to the investors. "Gentlemen, Madame Cruz, it appears we have our translator. If you will grant me the honor of taking your seats, we have a $14 billion empire to build." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Klaus Becker let out a low, booming chuckle. He pulled out his leather chair and sat heavily. "Ich mag sie. Sie hat Mut, fangen wir an." Shila looked at Rocky. "He says he likes me. I have courage. Let's begin." Isabella Cruz offered Shila a small, approving smile and took her seat. Antoine Laurent, looking highly suspicious of Gregory, sat down next. Within 30 seconds, the room was reassembled. Rocky pointed to the empty, high-backed leather chair at his immediate right, the seat of the lead negotiator. "Ms. Cooper, have a seat." Shila took off her catering apron, draped it over the espresso machine, and walked to the head of the table. The invisible waitress was gone. The conductor had arrived. The next 3 hours became a legend in the halls of Whitmore Dynamics. Taking the seat at the head of the table, Shila pulled the massive 500-page leather-bound dossier toward her. It was a labyrinth of legal jargon and financial projections. Gregory Langdon sat across from her, his arms tightly crossed, practically vibrating with rage and anxiety. Rocky leaned in. "Page 42, he whispered to Shila. "The European distribution matrix." Shila nodded. She didn't just read the text, she orchestrated it. "Messieurs, Madame Cruz," Shila began, her voice carrying an air of absolute authority that commanded the room. She looked at Lorenzo Rossi. "Signor Rossi, per quanto riguarda l'integrazione dei vostri porti a Genova." "Mr. Rossi, regarding the integration of your ports in Genoa." She explained the complex docking fee, restructuring in lyrico Italian. Without missing a beat, she pivoted to Tiago Mendes. "Senhor Mendes, a rede ferroviária no Brasil exigirá investimento de capital de 12% da Whitmore." "Mr. Mendes, the railway network in Brazil will require a 12% capital investment from Whitmore." It was a linguistic ballet. Shila translated Rocky's strategic visions seamlessly into 5 different languages, tailoring not just the words, but the cultural delivery. With Klaus Becker, she was direct, logical, and firm. With Antoine Laurent, she emphasized legacy, partnership, and prestige. With Isabella Cruz, she focused on innovation, autonomy, and mutual respect. Rocky watched her with growing awe. He had employed dozens of Ivy League-educated interpreters over his career, but none of them possessed Shila's fluid, dynamic comprehension. She wasn't just passing messages back and forth like a machine. She was smoothing over cultural frictions before they sparked. She anticipated objections before they were fully voiced. But as the meeting pushed into its second hour, the real battle began. They reached Section 8, the equity and control clauses. This was the heart of the deal, the section where the balance of power would be legally enshrined. "Let's move to the secondary distribution rights," Gregory Langdon suddenly interrupted, his voice tight. He pushed a supplementary folder toward the center of the table. "I've taken the liberty of drafting a minor amendment to the Apex Clause. It simply provides a fail-safe in the event of a market downturn. I've had it translated into the respective summary sheets in your folders." The investors opened the blue folders placed at their seats. Shila's eyes narrowed. As a caterer setting the table earlier that morning, she hadn't seen those blue folders. Gregory had slipped them in while the room was distracted by the chaos. Klaus Becker began reading the German sheet. A deep frown carved itself into his forehead. "Herr Whitmore," Becker said, his tone turning instantly frosty. "Das steht in krassem Widerspruch zu dem, was wir vereinbart haben. Sie verlangen hier die Kontrolle über das gesamte europäische Transportnetz, wenn die Gewinne unter 5% fallen? This directly contradicts what we agreed upon. You are demanding control over the entire European transport network if profits drop below 5%. Shila stopped. She looked at Rocky, translating the German. Rocky looked completely bewildered. "What? No, Klaus, that is absolutely not our arrangement. Our baseline is mutually shared risk. We don't seize control." "Ce document dit le contraire," Antoine Laurent added coldly, waving the French translation of the blue folder. "Il stipule que Whitmore Dynamics aura un droit de veto sur les syndicats maritimes français." This document says otherwise. It stipulates that Whitmore Dynamics will have veto power over French maritime unions. "And in Spanish," Isabella Cruz said, her voice dripping with venom, "it says you retain the right to auction our rare earth metal reserves to Apex Solutions if our production slows." "Apex Solutions," Rocky slammed his hand on the table. "Apex is our competitor. I would never put that in a contract." "It's standard boilerplate language, Rocky," Gregory said quickly, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead. "It's just legal protection. The translators they probably butchered the nuance in these summary sheets." Gregory pointed an accusing finger at Shila. "This is what happens when you let a waitress play corporate lawyer. She's confusing them." Shila didn't flinch. She picked up the English master copy of Gregory's minor amendment and scanned it with her trained, photographic eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," Shila said, her voice cutting through the rising shouting match. She pointed a slender finger at a densely packed paragraph on page 3 of the amendment. "This isn't boilerplate. Clause 8.4, B. It is a hostile takeover trigger." She looked up, locking eyes with Gregory. "It states that if Whitmore Dynamics' stock falls below a specific threshold, a threshold that would certainly be triggered by a panic sell-off, the management of the international assets defaults to a third-party holding company." Shila flipped the page, her heart pounding but her hand steady. "A holding company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name L&G Equities." Rocky turned slowly to his COO. "Langdon and Gregory," Rocky whispered. "You son of a bitch! You were trying to tank the stock by sabotaging this meeting, triggering the fail-safe, and seizing control of the international assets to sell them off to Apex." Gregory stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "You're going to take the word of a caterer? She's misreading the legal text. She has no idea what she's looking at." "No," Shila said softly, switching to perfect, icy French, addressing Antoine Laurent directly. Monsieur Laurent, regardez l'article 8, paragraphe 4. Le nom de la société écran est là. Il a essayé de vous voler vos entreprises et de détruire Monsieur Whitmore dans le processus. Mr. Laurent, look at Article 8, paragraph 4. The name of the shell company is right there. He tried to steal your companies and destroy Mr. Whitmore in the process. Antoine Laurent quickly scanned the document. His face went purple with rage. He looked up at Gregory with pure, unadulterated hatred. Klaus Becker, having found the same clause in his German copy, stood up. He looked like a man ready to commit physical violence. Das ist Betrug, Becker roared. This is fraud. Security, Rocky bellowed, pressing the intercom button on the table. I need security in the penthouse boardroom immediately, and call the FBI field office. Gregory Langdon backed away from the table, his confident veneer completely shattered. He looked like a cornered rat. Rocky, be reasonable. Apex offered a fortune. I was trying to save us. The heavy boardroom doors burst open, and 3 large corporate security guards rushed in. Escort Mr. Langdon from the building, Rocky said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. Confiscate his electronics, his keycards, and lock down his office. He is not to touch a single piece of Whitmore Dynamics property. As Gregory was dragged out of the room, sputtering empty threats, the heavy silence returned to the boardroom. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, the atmosphere had been cleansed. Rocky ran a hand over his face, exhausted, but deeply relieved. He looked around the table at the 5 international titans. Gentlemen, Madame Cruz, I apologize for the unprecedented drama, but it seems the rot in my company has been exposed and excised. Rocky turned to look at Shila. She was sitting quietly, her hands folded neatly over the dossier, the catering vest hanging on the espresso machine behind her, serving as a stark reminder of where she had been just hours ago. Thanks to Ms. Cooper, Rocky added softly. Isabella Cruz leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands. She looked at Shila with profound respect. Senor Whitmore, Isabella said in Spanish, waiting for Shila to translate, but staring directly at the younger woman. No firmaremos este acuerdo a menos que ella sea nombrada el enlace oficial para nuestras comunicaciones. Ella nos salvó de un desastre. Shila felt a lump form in her throat as she translated the words for Rocky. She says, They will not sign this agreement unless I am appointed the official liaison for our communications. She says I saved them from a disaster. Rocky smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn all day. Well, Miss Cooper, it seems you just got a promotion. The heavy scratch of luxury fountain pens against thick, watermarked parchment was the only sound left in the penthouse. One by one, the 5 titans of the European quintet signed the final page of the merger agreement. When Klaus Becker added his sharp, angular signature to the bottom line, the $14 billion alliance was officially cemented. Rocky Whitmore let out an exhale that seemed to carry the weight of a decade. He pressed a button beneath the mahogany table, and within seconds, 2 executive assistants entered, not with water pitchers, but with silver trays bearing crystal flutes and a vintage bottle of Dom Perignon. Shila Cooper stood quietly near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The storm was finally breaking, casting long, golden rays of afternoon sun across the gray waters of Lake Michigan. She still wore her white button-down and black slacks, but the catering vest was gone. She felt entirely out of place, yet more grounded than she had in 6 months. Isabella Cruz walked over, holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to Shila. Salud, Senorita Cooper, Isabella said, her dark eyes softening. You have a rare gift. Do not let men like Gregory Langdon or even Rocky Whitmore make you forget your value. "Thank you, Madame Cruz," Shila replied in gentle Spanish, accepting the glass. "I appreciate your trust." As the investors finished their pleasantries and were escorted to their private elevators, the adrenaline that had been sustaining Shila suddenly crashed. She placed her untouched champagne on a side table, her hands trembling slightly. "Don't go anywhere," Rocky's voice broke through her thoughts. He was standing by the boardroom doors, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. The formidable billionaire looked suddenly human, exhausted, but deeply grateful. "My private office. 5 minutes." Rocky's inner sanctum was a stark contrast to the boardroom. It was surprisingly Spartan, lined with whiteboards covered in complex robotic schematics and supply chain algorithms. He sat behind a sleek glass desk and gestured for Shila to take the leather chair opposite him. "I pulled your file while the lawyers were notarizing the final pages," Rocky said, sliding a manila folder across the glass. "Georgetown University, summa cum laude, dual degrees in linguistic anthropology and international business. You interned at the United Nations in Geneva. Then, a 6-month employment gap, followed by a stint at FedEx, and now Crescent Catering." Rocky leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes searching hers. "What happened, Shila?" Shila looked down at her hands. The candor of the moment left no room for pride. "My father was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer, Mr. Whitmore. The treatments were experimental, and our insurance found a loophole. The medical bills crossed $400,000 in 8 months. When he passed away, the debt fell onto my mother and me. I had to leave my graduate program. The bank threatened to foreclose on my mother's house in Logan Square. Delivery driving and VIP catering gave me the instant, liquid cash I needed to keep the lights on and pay the minimums." Rocky listened in absolute silence. He didn't offer hollow pity. He understood the brutal mechanics of debt and survival. "Gregory Langdon was paying off the lead catering manager," Rocky said quietly, changing the trajectory of the conversation, but keeping his eyes locked on hers. "We just reviewed the security footage. Gregory handed him an envelope of cash at 6 a.m. to call in sick, ensuring the regular vetted staff wouldn't be here. He didn't count on a desperate, overqualified replacement volunteering for a double shift." Shila's breath hitched. "And Beatrice? The translator?" "Northwestern Memorial Hospital just called my head of security," Rocky said, his jaw tightening. "Beatrice has a broken collarbone and a concussion. She'll live." But she confirmed the vehicle that hit her on the Eisenhower was a black SUV with removed license plates. It wasn't an accident. Gregory tried to physically eliminate our ability to communicate today. A chill ran down Shila's spine. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was organized violence. "Gregory is being handed over to the FBI as we speak," Rocky continued. "But the rot doesn't stop with him. Apex Solutions, our main rival, orchestrated this. And if they were bold enough to orchestrate a hit and run, they are deeply embedded in my network. I need someone who can see the things I can't. Someone who understands the nuances of international communication and isn't blinded by corporate loyalty." He pulled out a heavy piece of cardstock and slid a Montblanc pen toward her. "Effective immediately. You are the Executive Liaison of International Affairs for Whitmore Dynamics. Your starting salary is $450,000 a year, with a comprehensive benefits package that will retroactively cover your mother's outstanding medical debts through our Platinum corporate policy." Shila stared at the number on the contract. $450,000. It was a lifeline. It was the end of the nightmares, the end of the collection calls, the end of watching her mother cry over the kitchen table. "Mr. Whitmore, Shila started, her voice finally breaking. "You earned it, Shila. You saved my life's work today." Rocky said firmly. "But I need to know you're ready for what comes next, because we are going to war with Apex Solutions, and I need you on the front lines." Shila picked up the pen. Her hand was no longer trembling. She signed her name with fluid, decisive strokes. "When do we start?" she asked. 72 hours later, Shila Cooper stepped out of a private town car and looked up at the towering glass facade of the Aeon Center. She was no longer the invisible waitress in a polyester vest, wearing a sharply tailored Navy Theory suit and carrying a leather Prada briefcase, a signing gift from Rocky. She walked through the brass revolving doors with a newfound, quiet authority. Her mother's medical debt had been wiped out in a single-wire transfer to Chase Bank the previous afternoon. The profound, crushing weight that had sat on Shila's chest for over a year had vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. She swiped her new black-tier security badge at the executive elevators. The doors chimed, opening to the 65th floor. "Morning, Miss Cooper," the head receptionist greeted her with a warm, respectful nod. "Good morning, Sarah," Shila smiled, walking briskly past the very boardroom where her life had changed. She entered her new corner office, dropping her briefcase on a massive oak desk. But there was no time to admire the panoramic view of the city. Rocky Whitmore was already standing in her office, alongside David Aris, Whitmore Dynamics' intensely caffeinated head of cybersecurity. "We have a massive problem," Rocky said without preamble. David ran a hand through his messy hair, dropping a thick, decrypted file onto Shila's desk. "We seized all of Gregory Langdon's personal hard drives before the FBI took him into custody. My team managed to bypass his two-factor authentication on a hidden cloud server he was running out of a proxy in Estonia." "What did you find?" Shila asked, pulling the file toward her. "A ledger," David explained, tapping the paper. "A massive shadow ledger tracking bribes, off-the-books shipments, and illicit communication with Apex Solutions. But there's a catch. We can't read it." Shila opened the file. The pages were covered in dense, chaotic text. It wasn't binary, and it wasn't standard encryption. "El Cargune, Zorzi. Rete di trasporto. Der Adler ist gelandet. Carga fantasma. Lauro geita eta bost, mila bederatziun. Etta hogeita hamabien. Se puntu batlau hiru 0e. "He didn't use a computer algorithm to hide his tracks," Rocky said, his expression grim. "He used a polyglot cipher. He knew we monitored for digital encryption, so he wrote his ledgers in a hybrid mix of languages, regional slang, and supply chain shorthand. My analysts are running it through translation software, but the AI is just spitting out gibberish. It lacks context." Shila's eyes darted across the text. Her eidetic memory fired, locking onto the patterns. The linguistic anthropology training she had abandoned for catering was suddenly the most valuable weapon in the room. "It's not just multiple languages," Shila murmured, leaning over the pages. "It's dialectical masking." "English, please," David said, leaning in. "He's using Basque. El Cargune means junction or meeting point in Euskara," Shila pointed out. Combined with Italian infrastructure terms, Rete di trasporto means transport network. Then he drops a German idiom, Der Adler ist gelandet, the eagle has landed, followed by Spanish smuggling slang, Carga fantasma, or ghost cargo. She looked up at Rocky. "The AI can't read this, because it's not looking for human intent. Gregory wasn't just hiding money, he was hiding physical locations." Shila grabbed a red marker from her desk and circled the coordinates at the end of the sentence. 45.903, 2 north, 6.1430 east. These are GPS coordinates. David quickly typed the numbers into his tablet. His face paled. "It's a private freight terminal on the outskirts of Geneva, Switzerland." Geneva? Rocky frowned. We don't have active operations in Geneva. Our European hubs are in Frankfurt and Paris. Shila rapidly scanned the rest of the page, her mind translating the chaotic jumble of 5 different languages into a cohesive narrative. She translated aloud as she read, her voice growing more urgent with every sentence. Junction 8, Transport Network. The Eagle has landed. Ghost cargo. Geneva. Payment cleared through Limassol. Project Icarus is en route to Sterling Campbell. Rocky's blood ran cold. Sterling Campbell, the CEO of Apex Solutions. What is Project Icarus? Mr. Whitmore, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Project Icarus is the code name for our next-generation automated drone prototype. It's not supposed to leave the R&D vault in Chicago for another 2 years. It's the crown jewel of our defense contracts. Gregory wasn't just trying to sabotage the merger, Shila realized, the full scope of the treason coming into focus. He was stalling the investors so he could use the chaos as a smokescreen. While everyone was distracted by the failing deal, he had someone physically smuggle the Icarus prototype out of the building. He sold your most guarded intellectual property to Apex. Rocky slammed his fist onto the oak desk. If Sterling Campbell reverses engineers that prototype, he won't just ruin Whitmore Dynamics. He'll hold a monopoly over global automated defense logistics. The European quintet will void our $14 billion contract overnight if they find out we lost the Icarus tech. Shila flipped to the next page of the ledger, her eyes scanning a column of financial transfers. There's more, she said softly. What else? Rocky demanded. The payment for the prototype didn't come directly from Apex Solutions, Shila said, tracing the transaction route noted in a mix of Portuguese and French banking terms. It was routed through a shell company in Limassol, Cyprus, but the ultimate guarantor of that offshore account is Lorenzo Rossi. The silence in the office was deafening. Rossi? Rocky repeated, disbelief warring with anger. The Italian transport king? One of the 5 investors who just signed the merger with us? He's playing both sides, Shila confirmed, tapping the paper. Rossi funded Apex's purchase of your stolen tech. If the merger succeeded, Rossi gets a massive payout from your supply chains. If the merger failed, he already bought your best technology through Apex at a steep discount. He funded Gregory's sabotage from the inside. Rocky paced the length of the room, his mind racing. The man who had sat at his table, drank his champagne, and signed his contract was actively funding the theft of his empire. The coordinates in Geneva, Rocky said, stopping to look at David. When does the ghost cargo arrive at that freight terminal? David checked the flight logs cross-referenced with the ledger's dates. A private chartered cargo plane left Chicago O'Hare last night. It lands in Geneva in exactly 14 hours. Rocky turned to Shila, his eyes burning with a fierce, reckless determination. Pack a bag, Ms. Cooper, Rocky commanded. We are flying to Switzerland. We are going to intercept that prototype before Sterling Campbell gets his hands on it. And then we are going to destroy Lorenzo Rossi. The Gulf Stream G650ER tore through the stratosphere at Mach 0.9, leaving the American coastline far behind. Inside the luxurious, wood-paneled cabin, the atmosphere was anything but relaxed. Rocky Whitmore sat at the polished walnut conference table, staring at a satellite map of the Swiss Alps, while Shila Cooper was surrounded by a sea of decrypted ledger pages, financial manifests, and high-resolution photographs of Gregory Langdon's covert operations. Beside them sat Jonathan Hayes, a heavily scarred, no-nonsense former Navy SEAL who now directed Whitmore Dynamics' elite private security detail. Hayes was currently inspecting the loading mechanism of a sleek SIG Sauer pistol. The target is a decommissioned freight depot just outside the Mayrin Industrial Zone, Hayes said, tapping the digital map on the monitor. It's technically Swiss soil, but it borders the French territory. Smugglers love it. Jurisdiction is a nightmare. Our intel shows 3 heavily armed Apex Solutions contractors waiting for the cargo plane to land. Once they load Project Icarus into their armored transport, it disappears into the Alps. We have a 10-minute window between the plane touching down and the truck rolling out. Rocky rubbed his temples, the exhaustion of the past 72 hours finally catching up with him. We cannot let Sterling Campbell get that prototype, Hayes. Do whatever it takes to ground that truck. We go in quiet, disable the transport vehicle and extract the crate, Hayes replied. But we're flying blind on their communications. My tech guys can intercept their radio frequencies. But Apex mercenaries use rotating, localized encryption. It's useless to us if we can't understand them. Shila looked up from a stack of bank routing numbers, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. They aren't using localized encryption, Mr. Hayes. They're using regional dialects to bypass digital wiretaps, just like Gregory did in the ledger. Hayes frowned. How do you know that? Because Sterling Campbell is cheap, Shila stated flatly, tapping her pen against a manifest. I found Apex's hiring invoices buried in the Limassol Shell Company files. He didn't hire top-tier international ghosts. He hired milieu corse, Corsican mafia enforcers who double as corporate muscle in the French Riviera. They don't speak standard French. They speak Corsu, a highly specific dialect that blends Tuscan Italian with Southern French. AI translators can't process it in real time, especially over radio static. Rocky looked at her, a slow, predatory smile creeping onto his face. But you can. My linguistic anthropology thesis at Georgetown included a deep-dive field study into Mediterranean insular dialects, Shila said, her voice steady. If you patch their radio feed into my headset, I can tell you exactly what they are doing, where they are moving, and when they are going to strike. 4 hours later, the bitter, biting cold of the Swiss night hit Shila like a physical blow. She stood inside a darkened, climate-controlled mobile command center, a modified Mercedes-Benz Sprinter van parked half a mile from the Mayrin freight depot. The snowy peaks of the Jura Mountains loomed in the distance, illuminated only by the pale moonlight. Inside the van, the glow of tactical monitors cast sharp shadows across Rocky's face. He stood next to Shila, who was seated at the comms terminal, a heavy tactical headset clamped over her ears. Plane is on the tarmac. Hayes's voice crackled over the secure channel. He and his 6-man team were positioned in the shadows of the rusted shipping containers, completely invisible in the freezing rain. Cargo doors are opening. I have eyes on the Icarus crate. 3 hostiles are moving it toward a reinforced Mercedes truck. Suddenly, Shila's secondary monitor flared to life. The intercept software had caught the Apex mercenaries' radio frequency. A burst of harsh, guttural language flooded her ears. Avamo vemu. Usgio Campbell vole sta cosa in un camione prima che a polizia di frontiera fia usogiru. A gruff voice barked over the static. Shila's fingers flew across her keyboard, typing the translation onto the main screen for Rocky to read. Shila. Moving now. Mr. Campbell wants this in the truck before the border police make their rounds. Hold position, Hayes, Rocky ordered into his mic. Let them load it. We hit the truck's tires the second the crate is secured. Another voice crackled on the Corsican frequency. Aspetta. Aggiu visto un movimento vicino au perimetro nordu. Controlla I container. Shila's blood ran cold. She hit the transmit button to Hayes. Hayes, they spotted movement. North perimeter by the containers. They're flanking you. Damn it, Hayes hissed. Team, break contact. Fall back to cover. Gunfire erupted. The sharp, suppressed cracks echoing through the comms. The operation was instantly blown. The element of surprise was gone. "They're rushing the truck!" Shila yelled over the noise, listening to the frantic Corsican orders. "The driver is instructed to ram the gate. They are leaving the others behind. If that truck hits the main road, we lose it." Rocky gripped the back of Shila's chair, his knuckles white. "Hayes is pinned down. We can't stop the truck." Shila stared at the radio interface. An insane, desperate idea flashed through her mind. It was a gamble that could get them all killed, or it could save a $14 billion empire. "Mr. Whitmore," Shila said, her voice eerily calm, "override the depot's main PA system. Now." Rocky didn't hesitate. He smashed his fist onto the control deck, routing the van's microphone directly into the freight yard's massive, rusted loudspeaker towers. Shila pulled the microphone toward her. She closed her eyes, visualizing the authoritative, icy cadence of a high-ranking Swiss border police commander she had once studied. When she spoke, her voice boomed across the entire industrial zone in absolutely flawless, terrifyingly aggressive Swiss French. "Ici la police fédérale de la Confédération suisse. Coupez le moteur immédiatement. Le périmètre est encerclé par des tireurs d'élite. Sortez du véhicule les mains en l'air, ou nous avons l'ordre de tirer pour tuer." "This is the Swiss Federal Police. Kill the engine immediately. The perimeter is surrounded by snipers. Step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air, or we are authorized to shoot to kill." The sheer volume and absolute linguistic authority of the command shattered the chaos of the firefight. Inside the compound, the heavy diesel engine of the armored truck suddenly choked and died. The Corsican mercenaries, arrogant but entirely unwilling to die in a shootout with a phantom Swiss sniper squad, threw their weapons onto the wet tarmac. The truck doors opened and the driver stepped out, his hands raised high above his head. "Hayes," Shila whispered into the secure channel, reverting to English. "The truck is dead. The driver is out. Take them." Within seconds, Hayes and his team swarmed the vehicle, zip-tying the mercenaries and securing the massive titanium crate containing the Icarus prototype. "Target secured, boss," Hayes reported, breathing heavily. "Remind me never to play poker with your new executive liaison." Rocky let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 days. He looked down at Shila, who was shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash, her hands still resting on the comms board. "Ms. Cooper," Rocky said softly, a profound respect etching his features. "You just saved my company for the second time this week. But we aren't done. We have the prototype. Now, we use it to cut the head off the snake." 72 hours later, the sun beat down on the pristine, manicured lawns of the Villa d'Este, a breathtaking Renaissance patrician residence sitting on the shores of Lake Como, Italy. It was a playground for the European elite, a place where fortunes were traded over espresso and truffles. Lorenzo Rossi sat at the head of a sun-drenched terrace table, sipping a dark ristretto. The Italian transport king looked relaxed, his bespoke linen suit perfectly pressed. He believed he had won. Gregory Langdon was taking the fall in America. The Icarus prototype was safely in the hands of Apex Solutions, and his offshore accounts were quietly swelling. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. The emergency meeting Rocky Whitmore had called was highly unusual, but Rossi assumed it was a desperate plea for an extension on the merger's execution. A pair of heavy wooden doors swung open. Rocky Whitmore walked onto the terrace, exuding a dangerous, quiet calm. Flanking him was Shila Cooper, looking immaculate in a tailored charcoal blazer, holding a single, slim leather portfolio. Behind them walked Klaus Becker, Isabella Cruz, Antoine Laurent, and Tiago Mendes. Rossi smiled warmly, standing up with his arms open. "Rocky, my friend, we were worried about you. This emergency summons, I hope the transition of the merger is running smoothly. Sit down, Lorenzo, Rocky said. His voice was completely devoid of warmth. Rossi's smile faltered, but he took his seat, eyeing the other members of the quintet. Klaus Becker refused to look at him. Isabella Cruz's jaw was tightly clenched. "What is the meaning of this hostility?" Rossi demanded, playing the offended aristocrat perfectly. "We are partners now, Rocky. You should show more respect in my home country." "Partners do not fund corporate espionage," Rocky replied smoothly, taking a seat opposite Rossi. "Partners do not bribe chief operating officers to tank a $14 billion stock price, and partners certainly do not purchase stolen military-grade robotics prototypes through Cypriot shell companies." Rossi's face remained a mask of polite confusion, though a vein throbbed faintly at his temple. "These are wild, defamatory accusations. Apex Solutions is your rival, Rocky. Do not project your corporate insecurities onto me. Where is your proof?" Rocky didn't speak. He simply gestured to Shila. Shila stepped forward, placing the leather portfolio onto the center of the glass table. She didn't open it immediately. She looked directly into Rossi's eyes. "Signor Rossi," Shila began, her voice a cool, carrying alto, speaking in rapid, devastatingly perfect regional Italian. "Lei ha commesso 3 errori fatali. Il primo è stato sottovalutare la lealtà dei suoi stessi banchieri a Limassol. Il secondo è stato assumere mercenari corsi a Ginevra che non sanno mantenere il silenzio radio. You made 3 fatal mistakes. The first was underestimating the loyalty of your own bankers in Limassol. The second was hiring Corsican mercenaries in Geneva who do not know how to maintain radio silence." Rossi's complexion turned the color of ash. He stared at the former waitress, completely paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying realization that she knew exactly what he had done. Shila opened the portfolio. She slid a glossy, high-resolution photograph across the table. It showed the Icarus prototype crate sitting safely back in the Whitmore Dynamics R&D vault in Chicago, flanked by armed guards. As you can see, Shila switched to English so the rest of the table could understand the execution. Project Icarus never made it to Sterling Campbell. We intercepted your ghost cargo at the Mayrin freight depot. "This proves nothing against me," Rossi exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "You have a picture of a box. You have the ramblings of a fired COO. Any judge in Italy will throw this out." "Perhaps," Shila said calmly. She pulled out a thick, official-looking document, stamped with the blue seal of the Italian Maritime Authority. "Which brings me to your third mistake, Signor Rossi." She slid the document to Klaus Becker, who leaned in to inspect it. "You hid the Limassol Shell Company's funding behind layers of digital encryption," Shila explained, pacing slowly behind Rocky's chair. "But you used the physical shipping lanes of your own Genoese ports to move the bribe money to Gregory Langdon. To do that, you had to register the Shell Company's holding vessels under Italian maritime law." Shila looked at the other 4 investors. "Yesterday, while Mr. Whitmore secured the prototype, I paid a visit to the public archives in Genoa. Because Signor Rossi assumed no American executive could read 18th century Genoese maritime tax code, which is still used to log private vessel ownership, he didn't bother to redact his personal signature as the primary guarantor of the L&G Equities shipping line." Isabella Cruz gasped softly. Antoine Laurent shook his head in sheer disgust. Klaus Becker picked up the document, his eyes scanning the highlighted sections. He looked up, his expression murderous. "It is his signature," Becker growled. "Lorenzo, you betrayed all of us. You risked our capital to steal Whitmore's technology for yourself." "You are finished, Lorenzo," Rocky said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. I have already sent this entire portfolio to the European Central Bank, the SEC, and Interpol. Your assets are being frozen as we speak." Rossi stood up, his chair tipping backward and crashing onto the stone terrace. He pointed a trembling finger at Shila. "You, a little girl serving coffee. You think you can destroy an empire that took generations to build?" Shila didn't blink. She stood tall, the sunlight catching the fierce, unyielding intellect in her eyes. "I didn't destroy your empire, Signor Rossi," she replied coldly. "Your arrogance did. I just read the fine print." 3 Italian federal police officers stepped onto the terrace, their badges gleaming. They had been waiting in the villa's foyer, summoned by Rocky an hour earlier. They escorted a screaming, humiliated Lorenzo Rossi off his own property. The silence that followed was heavy, but completely pure. The rot was finally gone. Klaus Becker reached across the table, picking up a pen. He drew a bold black line through Rossi's name on the master copy of the merger agreement. "His shares are void," Becker announced, with German pragmatism. "We will absorb his equity evenly among the 4 of us. Rocky, the European Quintet is now the European Quartet, and we are honored to do business with you." Isabella Cruz stood up, walking around the table. She bypassed Rocky entirely and extended her hand to Shila. "Senorita Cooper," Isabella said, a brilliant smile breaking across her face. "If Rocky ever fails to appreciate your genius, there is a corner office waiting for you in Madrid. Name your price." Shila shook the billionaire's hand, a genuine, radiant smile touching her lips for the first time in a very long time. "Thank you, Madame Cruz. But I think I'm exactly where I belong." Rocky stood, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at Shila, not as a former caterer, not as an employee, but as his absolute equal. "Ready to go home, Miss Cooper?" Shila picked up her leather portfolio, the weight of the world no longer on her shoulders, but resting comfortably in the palm of her hand. "Lead the way, Mr. Whitmore." What a journey. From pouring coffee in the background to dismantling a multi-billion-dollar international conspiracy, Shila proved that true power isn't about the title on your badge, but the skills, resilience, and brilliance you bring to the table. Never underestimate the person quietly observing in the corner. They might just be the one holding the keys to the entire empire. If this thrilling story of corporate espionage, linguistic genius, and ultimate vindication kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that your current struggles do not define your future potential. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next high-stakes, real-life inspired drama. What language would you want to master to save the day? Let us know in the comments below.